This has been another monster week. We're seeing long-anticipated systems finally come alive with rapid progress across multiple pads as the entire launch site expands fast. We have some important developments well beyond Starbase that are worth paying close attention to, of course. How is Artemis II going after its testing late this week? What on earth is this thing, and Starliner now classified in the most serious category? Yes, there's a lot of ground to cover today.
Coming down the ladder now.
Hey, Marcus Housewithy here, and we finally have Pad 2 going through the long-awaited full deluge test system, including the top launch table pancake. Let's just rewind a little here though to set the stage. As we closed off last week, we had really only just watched SpaceX roll Booster 19 back to the build site after a successful cryogenic testing campaign at Massey's. That is now sitting on the far left engine installation stand in Mega Bay 1, which we can just see in this shot thanks to RGB aerial photography. With this engine installation underway, they are very soon going to need Pad 2 fully operational so that we can see the long-anticipated debut test of the full 33-engine Raptor 3 static fire. Great news in that department because they started putting the brand new launch mount through its paces on Monday. The first sign that something big was about to happen began on Saturday with the top deck largely emptied when we compare it to the flyover that came before. By Sunday night, SpaceX had ripped into removing the scaffolding around the booster quick disconnect hoods. They didn't stop there, moving right into stripping out all the remaining exterior scaffolding. Overnight, the booster transport stand returned back to the launch site for further testing. We noticed these red markings on the ground beforehand, so we suspect they have been testing the clearances for the tower arms before rolling in a full vehicle. Once the sun rose and the top deck was cleared, they started the process of final preparation work and testing. We watched SpaceX closing the doors on the sides of the booster quick disconnect hoods and then the two large blast doors on the side of the commodities bunker. The timing for all the events leading to a launch are crucial, so they began slowly extending and retracting both the liquid oxygen and the liquid methane quick disconnects. They did this a few times before eventually launching into a full speed retraction test, which you can see here in real time. It's pretty awesome to watch them both fall back in sync. Now, during all this quick disconnect testing, you may have noticed some water trickling down the sides of the orbital launch mount. Yes, after all this time, SpaceX were finally running some water through the top deck manifold in order to prime it. The detonation suppression system under the launch mount that we had recently seen tested was again fired a few more times before the tower arms were raised to the same height that they would be needed to lift a super heavy booster. This was obviously a simulation of a stacking event because the arms were then closed and raised up towards the top of the tower. Now notice within the launch table, they started closing the clamps one at a time. You can see the covers sticking up above the top deck here in this design, so we could all clearly see this happening from the ground cameras. That's really neat, and each of these, when collectively engaged, holds the booster securely onto the launch mount. And look at this. They were reopened as if to release the booster before liftoff. They seemed pretty happy with all this testing because they were right back to move the booster transport stand out of the way. This is where it gets exciting, of course. The clamps were closed once more and the pad was cleared of all the vehicles. Many were waiting in anticipation along Highway 4, and here we go. That's just the deluge buckets firing first, but take a look at this. Now, I knew that the deluge system in its entirety would be a pretty crazy thing to see, but I had absolutely no concept of the power and the pressure of this system. In this first look at the water-cooled top deck manifold in action, I suspect even many at SpaceX were gobsmacked. Obviously, this pad design uses significantly more water than what was used at Pad 1. The idea is that the full deluge system, including that colossal flame trench, will keep the pad well protected against erosion and damage well into the future with the more aspirational version 4 design. The version 3 vehicles are crazy enough though, of course, and with the dreams of rapid reusability in mind, this should all do very nicely. Once you add in those 33 Raptor engines at liftoff, the steamy plume that is going to erupt from this launch is going to just be bananas. With that, they then lowered the tower arms and were soon rolling the booster transport stand back to the build site. There is still more action to look out for in this area over the coming weeks though, with the new crane fully assembled. As I touched on last week, SpaceX is adding an additional roof to the top of the Pad 2 tower, and a section being pre-built on the ground here will need lifting soon. Pad 1 being rapidly upgraded to match Pad 2 has already had hundreds of concrete piles inserted below the foundation for the new flame trench. The drill has been moved out of the way now so that they can rapidly jump through the next phase, which is installing all these sheet piles laying around. We can see a row of them installed already on the tower side of the trench wall. You may also notice the few sheet piles here right beside the tower's base, so they are presumably going to expand the foundation here to support that larger tower base infrastructure that we currently see at Pad 2. Now, it was only a few weeks ago that we began to see these markings for the new launch site expansion, but they've really ripped into this, transforming the whole area in what seems like no time. This is already the brand new road referred to as the D5 entrance, which will be required for ships and boosters to access Pad 1 down the line. Again, it is worth referring to the plan, and we can see that SpaceX will expand the tank farm to support a much larger volume of propellants to drive both pads. This will, however, cut off access to the current road west of Pad 1. Much of the work clearing and levelling the existing land for the expansion already seems to be done, evident by the many rolls of geotextile which are being laid out. It looks like they are backfilling the site from east to west, with sand and dirt being moved and imported by hundreds of trucks coming in what seems to be daily. They really aren't messing around. Heading up towards the build site, this week we have a nice surprise if we first stop in at the Sanchez area. That is because there is a new piece of hardware installed into what we thought was going to be a second static fire stand. I mean, it may still be used for static fires down the line, I guess, but for now, it seems that SpaceX has added 6 connection points for pistons, which, of course, is very similar to those located on the ship thrust simulator stand used to initially stress test the vehicle when out for cryogenic proofing. We are wondering if they'll be trying to streamline the process by simply keeping their test stands a very similar design. Perhaps this fits with the new mystery structure at Massey's as well, so it's going to be exciting to see it all come together. We did see them install the arm bumper pieces recently, so it's possible that they want to perform some sort of combined testing. Hopefully, that will even be done with Ship 39 for Flight 12, since it does appear to be sitting in the bay patiently waiting at this point. Now, close by, peeking into the Star Factory this week, we could see the B-18.3 test tank upper half through the window. Thanks to Sean being here at the right angle, we noticed some new steel tabs welded between the trusses of the hot stage ring. This may be the result of some data that they got before the article gave way, and it looks to provide some added horizontal support between the braces for now. It could also be to do with a specific test coming, but we'll need to see if Booster 19 being prepared for flight has these same additions added too. Coming out of the factory this week, we also had another section for Ship 40 for Flight 13 roll across the ring yard and into Mega Bay 2. This is already the 4th section overall, leaving just 2 more to go before it can be fully stacked. Now, you may recall in an earlier episode I mentioned a lot of mobile homes had been cleared out of this site from in front of the apartments and offices building. Well, we seem to have more official confirmation of why. We now have a SpaceX filing for a project under the name of Starship Park, a near $14 million of investment that will be around 115,000 square feet in size. That, of course, perfectly matches this area right here, and the filing mentions that it will be a monument park with adjacent amenities. It sure would be neat to see a better designed home for Booster 12, which is SpaceX's very first caught Super Heavy, and maybe Ship 20 will go here too, at least until it can be replaced with their first caught Starship, hopefully later this year. So we even have milestones for Starship in Florida this week too, with them rolling out the first tower section for Space Launch Complex 37. I'll come back to this, but it's kind of crazy trying to keep on top of everything here. Something that is quietly becoming part of my everyday workflow is Opera, and it's sponsoring today's video. Think of all the images and videos, assets and scripts. It's a ridiculous number of tabs that I need to have open. What's been a game changer for me though is tab islands. I can organise video source data, launch schedules, FAA filings, orbital diagrams, X-posts, all in these logical groups. Then I can collapse or expand them as I need. I can even give them a name and select colours for them. When you've got dozens of tabs open, tab traces are super useful too. With this, Opera magically shows which tabs you've visited most recently thanks to this subtle underline under each. So instead of hunting around wondering where was that photo again, I can zero in on it instantly. Along with that, Opera AI is built directly into the browser, so it's faster, smarter, and no account is needed. I can highlight a page and ask it to explain a technical detail to me or help sanity check something that I've been writing myself, all without breaking my flow. With that, the split screen feature is awesome for when comparing documents or timelines side by side. You can have up to 4 tabs at once, fully resizable, which is great when you need to cross-check sources. Now, we use a lot of the Google tools with the team, and Opera lets you add your favourite Google services to the sidebar. No more additional tabs for Gmail or Google Calendar, it's all just here with one click. Another thing that I didn't expect to care much about, but use all the time now, is the detachable music player. I can control the music while I'm working, even outside the browser, and the second that I play a space video or live camera feed from here, it just pauses automatically, and it supports 7 different music streaming services already, like Spotify and Apple Music. It really does become a real personalised browser. So yeah, if your browser feels more like a mess than a tool, give Opera a try. You can grab it through the link in the description. Thank you, Opera. Okay, so back to Launch Complex 37, the section that rolled out is module number 6. There are 9 sections in total that make up an entire tower, and this section is the one that sits just above the ship quick disconnect arm. SpaceX is currently in the process of uncovering the previously installed piles to build up the large pile cap for the tower base, so we are a long way off having tower sections stacked. They are likely, I think, just going to store the tower sections right on site until the time comes. It is worth remembering that they will install 2 towers at this launch complex, so they may already be wanting to free up space at the Roberts Road site. That would mean that they can then rip right into preparing sections for a second tower. We of course had a string of only Starlink missions for Falcon 9 this week, one from Slick 4E at Vandenberg Space Force Base carrying 24 Starlinks to orbit. There were then 2 more from the East Coast lifting off from Space Launch Complex 40, both with batches of 29 on board. Interestingly, the mission on Thursday had the first stage landing on Just Read the Instructions, which was stationed off the coast of the Bahamas. This is only the second time ever that they have done a landing at this location. More importantly though, Starlink crossed a mind-blowing point where they are now exceeding an incredible 10 million subscribers in 160 countries. Currently, I believe they seem to be increasing by around 1 million subscribers every 50 days or so it's going to be interesting to see how the growth continues. Now, you may recall in my video last week we were still waiting for Crew 12 to arrive at the International Space Station. Everything went perfectly, of course, with Crew Dragon silently moving in for a smooth Valentine's Day docking. A few hours later, the hatches opened to welcome the 4 on board. Jessica, Jack, Sophie and Andre floated in, finally restoring the station to its full 7-person crew. Of course, with Crew 11's medical emergency forcing an early return in January, it was only NASA's astronaut Chris Williams up there to run the US segment. We have even more excitement with Blue Origin's Mark 1 lunar lander. Here is the vehicle named Endurance being rolled into Thermal Vacuum Chamber A at NASA's Johnson Space Center after being shipped over here just recently. This chamber is one of the world's largest thermal vacuum testing facilities. It stands at a whopping 27 metres tall with a diameter of 16 metres. It has previously hosted the Apollo spacecraft and the ginormous James Webb Space Telescope. To try to hold a near vacuum in a chamber this size is quite an extraordinary feat of its own. With this Blue Moon Mark 1 being the largest lunar lander ever built, this is one of the only chambers big enough for it to be tested correctly. They have been pushing it through the brutal extremes that it will face in deep space and on the lunar surface. The extreme temperature swings and the hard vacuum can cause a huge number of issues, and with the importance of a mission like this, there is no margin for weakness. They are putting it through roughly 11 days of thermal vacuum testing here, and assuming that it all passes as expected, it'll be one step closer to the major milestone to land on the moon. We have a few more updates on the Artemis II mission here. Following the wet dress rehearsal earlier this month, the SLS has simply remained at the pad as NASA continued the repairs. They've been sealing the areas that were leaking, and they have recently run a confidence test to assess the newly replaced seals. During the test, however, it had been observed that the flow of liquid hydrogen into the rocket had been reduced. The team soon found that issue and replaced a filter in the ground support equipment. Now, I will say it has been most appreciated that Jared has been taking the time updating us on everything going on here. He said that they have observed lower leak rates this time during the confidence testing. Given the long duration between missions, they don't have the frequent repetition needed to streamline this process. Artemis I, remember, launched over 3 years ago now, so it just doesn't have the advantage of that rapid iteration like, say, Starship. With that program, it may certainly seem more chaotic with the frequent flying and, well, failing often, but they have the ability to adjust the design so that problems surface faster and solutions follow just as quickly. I think ideally we would love to see NASA cryo-proofing the vehicle, or at least the interface system, well before needing to move the SLS to the pad. I think it would be neat to see test tanks out there similar to what SpaceX do, and that way they could be more confident with the process and have some updated designs for Artemis III and onward. Hydrogen, of course, is notoriously hard to work with given that it is the smallest element in the universe. It easily passes through tiny gaps in the seals and joints, so there is likely always going to be some leaking. Over time, hydrogen can even seep into the atomic structure of the metal trying to contain it. That leads to embrittlement, which weakens materials, but it also makes them even more likely to develop microcracks, making the leaks even worse. Blue Origin seems to have had a smooth run so far with their New Glenn second stage, which has been nice to see. That upper stage is fueled with hydrogen as well, but the volume needed for the SLS core stage is much more significant, needing greater pressures, so it is still vastly different to what Blue Origin is working with. The old Delta IV Heavy, now retired of course, was a monster filled with hydrogen too, but the SLS core stage is still significantly more powerful than even that, so they are likely dealing with a scale that is more of a challenge than anything in the past when it comes to hydrogen. Anyway, the SLS was preparing for its second wet dress rehearsal on Thursday this week. During that event, everything seemed to have gone fine apart from issues with ground communications at the Kennedy Space Center. Fortunately, they seem to have resolved that quickly. This time the hydrogen leak concentration didn't exceed the ground safety limits, so that's good news. The closeout crew were at it again to simulate the launch day procedures. They secured and sealed Orion's crew module hatch, inspected the seals, verified the environmental controls, and confirmed all mechanical and electrical connections. They also closed the launch abort system hatch and completed the final pad preparations before departing Launch Complex 39B. It was then that NASA could progress through the terminal count twice, with the teams practicing a full recycle of the countdown clock. The crew access arm was retracted during the first run, and the clock was paused at planned hold points, including T-1 minute and 30 seconds and T-minus 33 seconds. They then recycled back to the T-minus 10 minutes to begin a second terminal count. Despite a brief pause due to a booster avionics voltage anomaly, the issue was resolved, so everything went pretty much as planned. Assuming all the data checks out okay, March 6th is currently the largest realistic launch opportunity, so fingers crossed they can make that. Now, something a little unexpected was an update on the Starliner program. Just a couple of days ago, Jared released this letter and did a press conference addressing the infamous Starliner crew Flight Test 1 mission. Now, I'm not going to recover the full history of the Starliner saga because it feels like that has been largely done to death at this point, but what is significant is this. It has been decided, after going over all of the information, that crew Flight Test 1 is to be officially classified as a Type A mishap, which is the most most serious category. That, by the way, is even used with incidents involving crew fatalities. So yeah, to this day, they have not yet arrived at the true technical root causes for the thruster and propulsion issues with the Starliner service and crew modules. Jared even made it clear that it won't be flying for NASA again until the root causes for these anomalies are properly understood, addressed, and the propulsion system is fully qualified. The 311-page report is public now, and in the coming week, Congress will be presented with NASA's investigation on everything here. As Jared puts it in his letter, the most troubling failure was not the hardware but the decision-making and leadership that, if left unchecked, could create a culture incompatible with human spaceflight. In short, it seems that the mission could certainly have been much, much worse, and like many others out there, I think it is very nice to see the transparency from Jared and NASA on all of this. Finally, a pretty unique post from Rocket Lab this week, who are preparing for their next mission for Australia. Indeed, this mission is named That's Not a Knife. It'll be another hypersonic haste mission launching from Launch Complex 2 in Virginia, and we don't often get to see a great deal of attention with these. What has been amazing in this case is actually seeing the payload. This here is Dart AE, which is a scramjet-powered aircraft by Hypersonix in Australia, and this will be deployed at about Mach 7, I believe, based on their website. It uses hydrogen as its fuel as well, so expect some epic testing. Unlike many of the haste missions to date, this, based on the website here, looks to be streaming live. Rocket Lab has invested big to help restore hypersonic test capabilities commercially, and they are already lowering the cost and other barriers so that these test missions can happen much more reliably. Haste gives clients awesome control over the flight profiles at speeds right up to Mach 20, which is a substantial percentage of orbital velocity, so I hope we get to see a lot more of these missions in more detail. So there we have it, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this video. As more and more AI content floods the platform, we are just so grateful that you choose to watch along here to support all the work that the team does with me. Actual humans doing this stuff. So yeah, thanks for being subscribed, and for the many here even helping us out monthly with what we do. If you have even more time, you can help us out by checking out this video here next. Enjoy the week. I'll catch you for the next one.